Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Dynamics Corner, the podcast where we dive deep into all things Microsoft Dynamics. Whether you're a seasoned expert or just starting your journey into the world of Dynamics 365, this is your place to gain insights, learn new tricks, and reviewing the reviews of code. I'm your co-host, Kris.
And this is Brad. This episode is recorded on August 1st, 2024. Kris. Reviewing of code. What is the reviewing of code? Do you know what the reviewing of code is? Well, today we had the opportunity to speak with two amazing guests to talk all about code reviews, clean code, and several other points. With us today, we spoke with Natalie and Stefan. Good afternoon. How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
Doing very well, thank you. Very well.
Good morning.
Good morning. Good afternoon, Stefan and Natalie. Great to see you. Been looking forward to talking with you both. I have a lot of things I'd like to talk with you about. You know, I hear a lot about source control management, hear a lot about test automation, hear a lot about pipeline, CI/CD, but one thing that comes in with the source code, source control management. I hear people use different terms. Maybe we can get into that a little bit as well. But one of the things is code reviews. You know, everyone talks about, let's do code reviews. Let's talk about pull requests. Let's talk about a number of different things. And I thought, who else could we talk to about code reviews and clean code than the two of you? So before we jump into that conversation, though, would you mind telling everyone who's listening a little bit about yourselves? We can start with Natalie.
Yeah, hello everybody. So my name is Natalie. I'm located in Germany, working for Cosmo Consult as a programmer for solutions published to the App Source. So this is my main focus. I'm doing this since quite a long time already. I'm in the business since 2006, and I'm also a Microsoft MVP for business solutions.
That's right. Congratulations.
Fantastic.
On that. You had received that recently. And also, this is your second time speaking with us. We were fortunate and lucky enough to have you speak with us early on while we're still trying to figure all this out. So we appreciate your support and speaking with us then, and also returning to speak with us again. Stefan, sir, how are you doing?
Yeah, thanks. I'm doing good. Hello, everyone. I'm Stefan, and I've been working with NAV since I started with NAV actually. So many folks as of today are not familiar with NAV anymore. So I want to point that out. With NAV 2016, so not quite as long as Natalie, and I am originally from Germany. I'm now located in Poland for almost a year now, and I'm working as a freelance developer, so mostly doing coding stuff, but then again, as Brad already mentioned, all the stuff that comes with us going through pipelines and code reviews and clean coding and stuff.
Excellent, great. And you also have the BC coding stream, which I like to watch. Unfortunately, I see that you had moved it over to YouTube. I have to try to figure out the timing on that, but it's also, I appreciate seeing that. It's weird. Sometimes I just put it on and play it and just watch, and while I'm working or doing whatever. So it's nice to have stuff like that. I kind of feel like I'm in the office with you or something.
Well, that's the intention.
Yes, well, the intention worked. I'm sure many others listen to it or watch it, and if they don't, I suggest they do. So when it comes to code reviews, and I deal with it, and I get asked this often, even within, when I'm working, because we're talking about, okay, well, we're going to write code, we're going to do a pull request. Now someone's going to do a code review, and what is a code review? And what should someone do during a code review? Because that's what I get asked. And there's some basic stuff I can say, well, you look at some of the simple things. So what is a code review? What should a code reviewer do? What should a code reviewer look for? These are all the questions I have. So we'll hopefully get to them in the conversation. So what are your thoughts with that, Natalie? I know you work with code reviews quite a bit.
Yeah, so if I shall start. maybe I start with what it is not supposed to be. It's not, I simply get a formula called a pull request where I simply hit the approve button and that's it. My task as a reviewer is to look at the code, to check what is possible, at least within a short time. At least looking at it directly in the pull request itself. I could also download the whole branch and check it all in my development environment. But this is something that I, for example, do not do. However, I want to check formal stuff. I want to see that code applies to certain conventions, to style guides, in order to help us to read the code easily. And the other task I have, but it's not always possible, is to also validate actually code, to look out for maybe errors or even just spelling mistakes, whatever. It can be so simple things, but sometimes you're lucky, and if you have a good reviewer, he or she can also point you to real logical bugs that even a test did not discover earlier. That's the ideal part, but at least to have the formal stuff, because this is the easiest thing to do and usually doesn't cost too much time. Yeah, but also it's always a question of how much you go into detail, but maybe this is something that Stefan first can talk about as well.
Yeah, well, code reviews, it's such a huge topic. We could probably talk for hours straight about this. It really depends what kind of change you're reviewing, I think, especially with how much you go into detail. If I'm just looking at a small change, which also should receive reviews, I think, in my opinion, then you can maybe go a little bit more into details, or maybe you don't need to go into details at all, because it's just you can look through it in a few minutes and there is nothing special going on. And I probably go into detail for certain parts of code changes, of a feature change or something, when I feel the need to it. And then I sometimes also download the code onto my machine to be able to really do code navigation and stuff, to really look it through the code change. And then other changes really don't need much of detail. I had another thought. What was it? Sometimes what I also discovered was during code reviews that I saw a colleague maybe not as familiar with Microsoft's code base rewriting stuff or functionality that's already implemented in some of their helper code units. So it was really a possibility to point that out to them, so they learned new code units from the base of the system app, and reuse that and could get rid of some custom code. So that's also a good thing.
Very important point indeed.
That is a big point, and it goes with you hit a couple points with the comments that you made, and you touched upon maybe who should be doing the code review, because I also like to believe that code reviews can also be a learning experience or a teaching experience for someone, because I've had some individuals go through the code review experience that were new to AL development, not necessarily for the code review purpose for validating the code necessarily, but looking through it, they were able to learn new things by looking at some code that others had created. So that's one aspect that I like about the code reviews. So they were doing it not necessarily, like I said, for the approval process, but it was more of a training process. So your point, Stefan, about learning, because learning the Microsoft-based code units or the base library is important, because so many things have been added, or so many new methods, so many new code units have been added, that a lot of developers do recreate that unintentionally, unintentional duplication of what Microsoft already has. So being able to have multiple people look at it gives some good insight, and also provide the feedback with it. I like your approach, Natalie, too, of what it is not. And it's one of those daunting tasks as well, because it does take time to do it. So the size of the code review matters as well, because I've seen pull requests with hundreds of files, and I looked at it and I just scratched my head and I'm like, do I just click approve, or do I have to go through all of these changes? So
sometimes you have to.
Yeah, that's one thing to keep into consideration, I think, is the size of the code review. So with that, what is your take on who should be doing the code review? Is it a senior developer, functional consultant type, or how do you fit the code review in the process?
Ideally, everybody, but of course, this is not the way how we live it due to organizational restrictions, maybe also permissions, whatever. It's a question of how your pull requests are actually set up in your environment. For example, we are using DevOps, and we have some policies attached to branches that define that we have to create pull requests for everything. All of them have to be reviewed by at least one external, let's say, a second developer. And this is very, very useful in my opinion. And I also I really see the progress in quality since we switched from CAL to AL and this pull request approach with code reviewing. You can learn so much on both sides, really, and prevent many mistakes.
Absolutely.
So glad.
No, you had mentioned CAL back in the old, the older versions of Nav, and how the objects were embedded within the application, within the object designer. So the objects were built as part of the application. So keeping track of changes and doing code reviews, if anybody did code reviews back then, were extremely difficult. I know I used to export the text files just to track changes. I had PowerShell scripts set up just to export the text files, and then each day, load them into a repository so we could see the difference of what had changed, because it was very difficult in that environment to do it. So I'm happy to see that with AL, we moved forward to Visual Studio Code and having separate files to build these extensions. So
exactly. So I suppose none of us is missing these old times.
I'm not missing it for one moment at all. Stefan, you've been doing this since the 2016, so you had the opportunity to experience that as well too. And it was a similar process back all the way. If you go way back to Navision when it first started, it was the same concept other than the rotate client all the way up through. So we had some challenges. So it's refreshing, and it's also depending upon when someone started working with it is a learning experience, or someone needs to adapt to the changes of the way things used to be done in Cal versus where they are with AL. And you mentioned one thing, spelling mistakes. I'm famous for making a couple of those, by the way, with those. Spelling mistakes. How do you determine it's a spelling mistake? And I did see a topic recently that someone spoke about is which language someone should code in. So that would actually, I think, would attribute to what constitutes a spelling mistake. Because if someone's doing a code review and they're determining if the word's spelled correctly, what is your thoughts on that?
My take on that is really simple. I have a VS Code extension that checks it, and if it yells at me, I review that, and that would be the benefit of actually downloading the branch to have helper tools locally to help with the code review, and spelling mistakes in that extension would be one of them. And whenever it's blue, it's an info, then I look at it, and I usually keep some of the warnings that it spits out in either in my user settings or in the workspace settings as exceptions, because sometimes abbreviations are treated as a spelling mistake, although they are not. But it does a really good job also with camel casing and everything to pick the words up and check everything correctly. So that really helps a lot.
Which extension is that you use for that? That sounds helpful.
I would need to check. I'm from the top of my head, I don't know, but it has
an extension in VS Code.
Can you repeat that, please?
Sorry, the spell checker.
Oh, the spell checker. Okay,
Yeah,
spell checker extension. So the spell checker extension, does it work with any language or just English?
There are additional extensions per language. I think English is base, and then not?
You can load multiple languages and create your own libraries. I've activated for American English and British English because I have to develop some elements really in British English for a very specific application, and this really works. So it has different libraries.
Well, that's one I know many people who use it, and I work with many that use it, and I haven't, but I think I'm going to start as soon as we're done with this. Just to see. I'm afraid, I think, sometimes to see what comes up with it, but we'll see.
You really didn't use it yet? No
No.
spell checker, nothing?
No. Do you believe that? All these years,
No,
I
how is
told
it
you.
even possible? How can you survive any day like that?
I've made it, but I have. I know many use it because I end up sometimes seeing in the pull request their dictionaries where they add words, as you had mentioned too. As the info for the words that they want to accept with the spelling. So I know others use it, which is good. So with the code review and the code review process, you had mentioned what it's not, and looking for structural changes and coded changes. How do you base it? What do you base it on as far as when you look at, you said mentioned structural changes and content? Is it based on just experience, or are there certain standards that you follow as far as like a library or documented somewhere?
In my personal opinion, I try to stick to the Microsoft standards, so what they are using in their base apps, the base app plus, and this is very important in the newer repositories like BC apps for the system application and the business foundation app, because other apps who depend on us or Microsoft, they should not switch between language styles. They should find the same style of code to attach to read it easily. But I'm not telling that I'm applying everything blindly. There is always some criticism in it. I would not really stick to everything, but at least to everything that really makes sense and makes things easier to read. That's very important to me. What I have found helpful, which is not followed, for example, by Microsoft, is that properties within an object or whatever are sorted alphabetically, because only that way you can easily compare what's different between two versions of a file. Between two different files, actually.
That I do
just to have
use.
some base structure. That's
that I do
everywhere.
use, by the way. I use AZL tools, and I set up the code cleanup to go through and clean up all of the sorting, because I found, like you, it's easier to do a compare of what had changed if things are sorted in a certain manner. Because that way they're aligned, even if you use it to sort the procedures. I know there's some topic individuals have about, how do you sort the procedures with the locals and the globals, or do you group them together, or sort them by name? But I have found in the code review process it's helpful to have it sorted, and that's a valid reason for having them sorted, in my opinion, as well, to make it easier to do the review. So we talked about the use of a spell checker. Stefan, you mentioned like downloading the source so you could have the spell checker. What about some of the other source code analyzers? I know, do you think that should be part of the process? Because we know with the source code analyzers, the app source cop, for example, and there's other tools available. Do you use those as part of the code review? Do you think they're helpful as part of the code review?
Absolutely, yes. And that's actually, I did a live stream recently about where I reviewed one of the pull requests from Microsoft, and that's exactly what I did. I just ran this through all the analyzers, also the linter cop, to get all the different warnings and everything right away in VS Code, and then I could just write comments where I thought it was useful. I don't need to find those things myself if there is like helper tools that can do the work for you. And I just wanted to pick up on Natalie's comment on the guidelines introduced by Microsoft. I really agree with the approach to follow them where it makes sense. And I just wanted to give an example where I actively decided to not follow their guidelines. I think there is one rule for the variable naming, that it should be exactly like the type you're using. For example, for table name, that rule is disabled in all my repositories, for example, because it makes sense to a certain degree, but there's just too many false positives where I wouldn't agree to this rule. So it doesn't make sense for me. And the object naming, I decided a while ago already that I just cannot afford to have spaces in my object names since we're limited to 30 characters. So it's a Pascal case for me now through like everything. Same goes for field names. So I know there was this unwritten rule since forever that it should always be with spaces and everything, and then you end up abbreviating, then you add dots, and then it's all just abbreviations, so no one knows what it actually has to mean if they don't look at the caption. So that doesn't make sense for me at all.
I have to chuckle because I feel what you're saying with the naming with the 30 characters, because even if you try to do a customer card ext, if you're doing a customer card extension, right, and then you have to put an affix on it, you end up, I see crazy abbreviations for if you get some of the longer pages, like the sales credit memo, they start dropping off words, or journal gets abbreviated a number of different ways.
And then you add in like if you're doing app stores or even for PDEs, you're recommended to use a suffix, an affix, at least a prefix or a suffix of 3 characters. Now I like to add 2 extra characters per app I'm doing, so it's 5 characters already for the affix. So I'm left with 25 characters, and that's just not enough if you have spaces and all the stuff. So it's Pascal case for me for a few years already.
Although your approach makes a lot of sense, I totally agree. I don't do it. I only I try still, because it's just the rest of being an OG. I think it's just I was being used to that all my life. Business Central life. I try to create it as in the old way as possible. And if the space doesn't fit there, then I simply squeeze it into a Pascal case, or just remove one space and then the next.
I think in the end, it's all about consistency. And when I work for companies which have existing code and they want me to add code into their app or just help them develop, and they decide to have the spaces, I of course adjust. So this is the second part. While Microsoft sets somewhat of the base of guidelines, I think if a company agrees for themselves, like we want to do certain things differently, this should also be like always used. Sorry. So like a company-wide rule set of guidelines is the next layer, in my opinion. So yeah, when a company agrees to do like the old way, then of course.
So that is a good point where you can start, that the rules and the guidelines and to use can be company specific, whatever fits the company that's managing the code or the code that's theirs. And as long as, I agree with you, as long as you're consistent with what you're doing, it makes it easier for whoever's working with it, or anybody who's going to come in to do the code rework with the code after.
I think one good example for this is the this keyword. I think, Natalie, you posted the point where Microsoft agreed on or said that they're going to do it everywhere. So they're going to prefix variables. System app, okay, system app. Yeah, I mean, base app is another story. So they're going to prefix globals and functions that are in a code unit scope with this, although it's not mandatory by the language. And I know, or I read a lot of comments on Twitter that many people do not agree with this. So then again, if I would do a review at a company where it was agreed that they're not going to use it, then you should never use it that way, because I feel like, in my opinion, consistency is key. So if you want to use it, then use it, and always. If you do not want to use it, then only use it in those specific cases where it's necessary to use it, and otherwise not. But not switching around from code unit to code unit, because this ends up being annoying, in my opinion.
It does, which brings me to another. I have so many questions about this with code reviews and code processes, because you hit on a key point with this being added to the language as the language evolves and functionality evolves within the language, and maybe even standards evolve with the language, some code is created in earlier versions, right? Some code gets created all the way back from Cal, and it's a functionality that needed to be migrated or moved or upgraded to work with AL, or even in earlier versions of AL, so maybe you can pick a version. What about bringing in and using some of that new functionality where there wasn't a standard before, and there is a standard now, or there's new addition now? Is that something where you fix it as you go? Should someone review and update the code base to use some of this new functionality for the standards? Or is the challenge with that as far as adoption of new techniques and practices with code that hasn't been around for the inception of those changes?
That's a delicate topic, if I understood it correctly, because there are different approaches. And when it comes to such new standards as introducing this, Microsoft, for example, they have decided that they want to make it the new standard in the base app. But they also decided that for pull requests that are now already created for any new lines of code, they already want to edit, or at least allow it to edit now from then on. What they do not do is to choose one point at a time and convert everything in a separate pull request. And this is what I would actually do with my apps, which are smaller than the base app or any other standard app, obviously. But when I want to switch to another coding standard, for me, this is a topic for a separate pull request, which is doing only that. And I don't want to have pull requests that have one main task to change some functionality, some funky stuff, but then they also format this one, some totally unrelated code line in that object, changing to this and that, or I don't know. This is at least in my head, this is just one big mess, and I don't see the benefit of that. How do you think about that?
I think it's somewhat agree with you. I think my take on this is really, as you said, it has to be a separate code pull request, and it's also like if you change it through, like adjust something throughout the whole extension, this can introduce bugs since you change everything. You touch the code basically. If you change it, something can break, and so this has to be where outside of the group of developers, in my opinion. If you're working on a pretend extension, the customer needs to know they need to test again, and they probably need to test everything. So it should sit somewhere in a testing environment for some time, so they have time to review whether everything still works. If you're working for a product, then whoever, like the testers, needs to know that they potentially need to retest everything because you really touched everything. The other approach is, if you do not want to do like a major change like this, I feel like when you're working on one code unit, given that you don't have like code units with thousands and thousands of lines, if you have them separately created and like smaller code units, I would probably convert them one by one as I work on them. If I'm working on one topic, then I can convert that topic because I know it will be tested anyways, because I'm doing changes to that topic, so that I can adjust language and bring in those new language features as we go.
It's a mixed approach. I think it sounds situational. Natalie, you mentioned a point. If you're doing it for a smaller app, maybe it's easier to do it all at once. Stefan, you brought up some points of, maybe as you work through and you go through it. You also, Natalie, you mentioned something I think for the two of you, the topic of, and we started talking, I guess, around it, is what's in a pull request for a code review. You had mentioned that upgrading functionality within the language functionality or language standards should be its own separate pull request, where feature or fixes should be their own separate pull request. What do you both think of what should be in a pull request and what should be included with a pull request? And what I mean by that is it one issue per pull request? Is it one major feature per pull request? And within the pull request, if you use GitHub, you use DevOps. Those are the two popular tools. I know there are many other tools available that can be used. What documentation should the should be included with the pull request for the reviewer. Either one of you can jump on this one. I'm interested here in both of your opinions. You both have great opinions on all of this and points of view, so I'm eager to hear.
Stefan first?
Okay, we'll alternate. Stefan, you go first this time. We'll go alternate.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, hours of potential talking. First, what should be an issue? I mean, there is probably a line between what should be an issue or a feature, a request possibly, and what should be an epic with lots and lots of issues or features depending on the platform you're using. So that shouldn't be too big either. And then if you need to have a bigger issue, how many pull requests should you do? And I think this is also important if you want to control or if you want to improve the quality of the code review itself, because if you have, as you said, if you have thousands of objects touched in a single pull request, you're not going to expect that anyone takes the time, sits down 8 hours straight and just reviews everything you did there for the last 3 months. So not to mention the merging conflicts that arise with this, with those kind of huge changes. So I'm really in favor of small pull requests. I can imagine lots of pull requests for a single issue, as long as you have something that can be merged. Like if you, it's really hard to come up with an example here, but if you're working on a feature and you can encapsulate a few things out of this feature, like first I'm going to introduce this change, and then I need to introduce 5 more changes. I can separate those and merge them without breaking anything, and the target branch I'm merging to. I can totally imagine splitting it up just to make it easier to merge, to review, and to test possibly.
I have problems with the 100% agile paradigm, like making hundreds of tiny pull requests one by one, then fixing some previous pull requests and this and that, and at the end you have a long commit list of tiny changes or mostly bug fixes that nobody can really understand. And why I'm mentioning that is I'm developing, as I said, apps for app stores, and they are also to be used on on-premise environments. And we have teams that create also on-premise extensions, maybe from our app source extensions. And for them, although no one has approached me yet to do that, but in my opinion, the ideal way is that I provide such pull requests that any other extension developer can use as a pick list. They want a feature A and then this and that, and they don't want to pick 100 pull requests, but only a few with the functionality they need. They don't need to search for a bundle of pull requests for actually one big feature. Usually I try to really keep pull requests clean, so they cover a specific feature, topic, or bug fix for something, however, very encapsulated. And sometimes I do hit the situation that my pull request becomes too big in terms of the number of objects to look at. However, even when I do that, I still take care of my commits inside that pull request, that they are separated nicely. So you can click through the commits and check them individually. Like, for example, when I just did a code cleanup using the AZAL tools, then per single conversion step, I do a single commit, so you can check them one by one. This is a help for the reviewer. But overall, I still follow the line or the paradigm. You have to keep them small enough because it's a hazard to look at too large PRs. But again, I found it important to keep the commit history readable even to human beings. Anybody else handling it that way?
Yes, I prefer, as you had mentioned, I prefer the smaller pull requests for the individual changes. And I too do, commits are tough because it depends on what you're working on. I do go back, and if I'm doing a code review, I will look through the commit history. But depending upon the scope or the size of what the developer has with working on, some of their commits may be just a sense of saving and getting the code into the repository in the branch for that whatever they're working on. Some of that, I know we promote, committing it to get it stored in there in the event that you have a problem with the system that you're working on, or if somebody needs to take leave because of illness or from other emergency, somebody else can go pick back right up where they have and see the changes that they've made. So some of that with me is also with the commits depends upon the duration of the modification that you're working on. But those large pull requests, I think, are very difficult to go through, and also a pull request per, I don't know if you want to call it issue. I mean, again, it depends what you're working on, but one small topic, I'll leave the word as a topic, so that somebody's reviewing is they're not trying to look at multiple things. They're looking at one specific topic at a time so that they can put, I like to put my mind into that one topic and not try and say, okay, well, this goes with this goes with that. I can see the changes all for this one thing and see where it touches, and be able to work with it. And then as far as some of the comments, to go back for the code review as well, I know sometimes I go with, I saw Teenage Stark's code review session at Directions North America. I know he did it in Europe as well. And, I follow it. And it's one of the things that really got me thinking about this topic is even like putting in like the nitpicking, because, how deep do you go with the comments that you're making? I mean, there's some things that are fundamentally wrong, but then there's other things sometimes I have to go, it's okay, but do we let it go? Do we not let it go? Maybe you may want to change it or think about doing it this way. So I'm with Stefan. We could talk about this for days, I think, and not cover all the code review processes. I know I
want to comment on that real quick. When I was reviewing the Microsoft's code, I had exactly that thought. Do I really complain about all the different typing mismatches and everything that the linter cop warns about? Because I really don't like those. Or do I just let it go and just, it functionality wise, it doesn't change anything. But what I know is in Microsoft's code base, it's really hard to have them change anything once it's in there. So I decided to comment on everything, because now there is the opportunity to fix those, and I don't need to look at this for the next 20 years. So yeah, because I'm in partner code, I think it's way easier to fix those kind of things afterwards if you come across those kind of I wouldn't call it issues for the lack of a better word, but yeah, you can fix those afterwards. But for Microsoft's code, it's a different story.
Another reason, a good argument to handle it that way, as you said, is I don't know how you handle it, but in my career, it was always very helpful for me to look at Microsoft code, to learn from it, to copy some patterns or whatever. And if we let now bad Microsoft code into the code base, this will multiply by everyone who will see it and work with it. And this is something that I cannot live with. And so my pull requests, my code review, always very nitty, if such an adjective exists. And it can be very annoying in that. And I am also fearing that people get really irritated by that. And I hope nobody takes it personally, because even if you do that, the writer of this pull request, the author, still is king. He or she can always decline anything or accept it, or at least talk about it. And we never know what's on their mind, like how they want it to be. And I've made the experience that at Microsoft they are open to even those little things of code reviews. Most of them are really considered, and sometimes you get a thank you, I didn't see that, or whatever. So if you have the time and if you have the nerve to really do that, just go for it and see what happens.
What I also did in the code review, I ended up actually doing those changes for them. I created a pull request onto the pull request branch, because I said, well, I've downloaded the branch. I'm working on it, and while I'm looking at it, I can right away fix those little, like, here's a semicolon too much, or here's like a casing mismatch, as I said, or here would I just add some spaces, like empty lines, to just make it more readable. Just those kind of things I usually do right away in pull request, because I'm looking at it anyways. And then the reviewer still needs to like review my review pull request and accept all the changes to their branch, and then that way they know about what I changed, but they don't need to do the work again, which I already did before.
That's a good
Which
point.
wouldn't be necessary if Microsoft used all those tools available in their own repository.
It is true, because it's if you run through even their base source code analyzers, some of their base code will not pass any of those as well. So it's good. Your point is valid, Natalie, as well, as if they cleaned up some of those inconsistencies, and if we're using that as a model to go by, we could eliminate the multiplication of potential other, bad habits, bad design, or other issues with the code as well too. But sometimes I think we've all been in the case as well as, I'm just going to add this, I'll add this. And then you go back and look and say, had I known this from the beginning, I would have redone this whole thing and done it this way. So there's sometimes it goes back to your word. I like your new word, nitty. Where you're nitpicking at some of this stuff and just trying to, get an understanding of what the...
I guess I have a new nickname. It's Natalie.
Nitty Natalie. I like that. That right there. See, we can coin that as Nitty Natalie. Well, you have the librarian, but so it's Nitty Natalie, the BC Docs librarian.
One day maybe I will need the other one. Or maybe it's already my internal name at Microsoft, but nobody called me that way already.
Yeah, I'll have to make sure we Nitty Natalie. No, my thoughts to you is with that nitty, with anybody who makes the comments, I always look at the intent. I mean, there's nothing wrong with constructive criticism, because as you both had mentioned, sometimes someone may not be aware of something, or they can always, I know myself, I always want to learn to do things better if possible, or even learn different ways to do things. It doesn't necessarily, different doesn't always mean better, but sometimes difference there. And I think it's all in the intent of who's doing the review and the comments they make. If it's meant to be helpful or constructive, then people should be receptive to it and then make a decision on it, and not think of them as being, nitty Natalie.
So how does that work if you're on your own? Like if you're an independent developer, like how do you code review? Do you find peers to help you review your code? How does that work?
Sometimes there are, in companies I work with, there are other developers who can do the review, but sometimes there's just no one. So I mostly review myself after a time.
You sleep on it first?
Yeah, I mean, you always go back to your own code and wonder what you did there and why you did that. So but I'm again mostly using tools to get as much like warnings and infos and errors up front, to do as less mistakes as I possibly can. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, if there is no one to review, there is no one to review, and sometimes it would be better if someone would have reviewed my code.
Would you still go through the same process as if you're reviewing someone else's code, or because you're on your own, do you just speed through it?
Well, to be honest with you, I mean, mostly it's going through the code, getting it in, getting it tested, and if it works, it works. But yeah, sometimes for more crucial stuff, I really go back to it after a few days and review myself as I would normally review others. But most of the code I just end up working on and reviewing and reading one again and over again. And then if I notice something, I obviously, correct it.
That's good. It's a good habit to have, because, I know there's plenty of independent developers out there that they'll probably skip through some of that, unfortunately.
So just to kind of, we're talking about code reviews. I do want to talk about clean code and what clean code is in a minute. I think that's something else that we wanted to discuss. But now I'm thinking of this from the process point of view. Stefan, you're talking about testing. Natalie, you had mentioned it as well. So you have, within a repository, you'll have a main branch, and the main branch, and I'm assuming, should be whatever is loaded in production, right? Whatever is in someone's production environment. But there also is a point where there is a test environment. So someone will make a branch, that will make a modification for a branch, and they'll make a pull request. What are your thoughts on having a branch for whatever's in sandbox, the sandbox environment, so that we know what's in testing or what somebody's working on? Or is that would someone do a pull request into a test branch to have that code be tested? And then once that passes, have a pull request from the test branch into the main branch for the features that they'd want to bring forward? Or would you load code into the test branch from a developer branch, and then once it's completed, do a pull request to bring it into the main branch?
I still don't get what a test branch is, because I'm developing a development branch, or feature branch, so to speak. And when I'm finished and I'm creating the pull request policies attached to Azure DevOps, they just run pipelines based on the newly created code, temporarily merged into the target branch, and this is then tested by running automated tests. So what is a test branch?
Well, I was thinking more of if you had user-based testing. Stefan mentioned having the users test some functionality and test some changes. Automated testing, I'm a huge advocate for automated testing. We could talk days about that too. Yes, when you create a pull request to get brought into what we'll call the main branch of production, you could run all those automated tests should be executed to ensure that they pass as function. But all of those automated tests, or in some cases when working for customers, or if you're working for an end user, you still have to pass user acceptance testing in some cases. So at that point, you will have a sandbox environment with changes that are loaded for the users to test. Right. Afterwards, at a point, you can have some automated tests for those, but in this type of environment, you still would want to have user acceptance before moving it to production. So maybe it's good that you don't have to deal with that. Stefan, what are your thoughts on that? Do you have to do the same type of process, or have you worked with that same type of process?
Yes, and it's challenging. I just, through the conversation, I tried to think about how that used to be before we were using extensions in the CL days, but I can't really remember anymore. So the challenge is really that you have one code base. So if you have one testing environment and one test branch, and you have multiple features, what are you doing if one feature gets approved but 3 are still waiting for testing? How can you deploy? Because you cannot just merge the branch, because it contains all the feature branches that are ready for testing. So I'm using AirGo mostly, and I'm not sure if it supports more than that one branching strategy, but my main branch is basically what's currently like the bleeding edge of development. If I do feature branch, and if I do that, because I don't do that usually, and I will come to that in a minute, then that will obviously be separate, but once it's done, it will be merged into main. And then when I'm ready to deploy to production, and that's what I would call a clean deployment, then I would merge this main branch. If everything gets approved, I would create a release, and that would then create a release branch. So my main branch actually is not in production. It's my latest release branch. That allows me to do like not clean deployments, but like one feature at a time, where I would then cherry pick those changes, those commits onto that latest release branch, and then redeploy that as a new version. That's how I do that. And since I'm mostly on my own, I do not do feature branches for smaller things. I'm doing there is a word for that, how I'm doing that, like backlog development or something. No, I don't remember. But what I do if something is not yet ready to deployment to production, and I need to do that clean deployment, I will do feature flags. There is a nice open source extension. I would need to look that up. I think we can put it in some description afterwards or something. But that will let you do like code branch, like ifs. Basically, you can switch off code. You can do application areas by features, and the features can be enabled and disabled separately in the environment per company, or not per company. Don't quote me on that, please. But what you can do is you can push code to production, and you just don't enable it. So the pages are not there, the code is not executed, table fields get created because that's just how it is, but nothing like runs. And if you do that correctly, it really works very good. So that's how I usually do that approach. Obviously, if I do have a bigger feature, then I will put it on a different feature branch because it's too much of a hassle to put those feature conditions everywhere. But yeah, I mostly do development on the branch itself and then push everything to production once it's ready.
No, it's good. It's good. It's interesting I like to talk and to see how others do it as well. I mean, there's many different options. And again, I think it does come down to what works for the environment, as long as there's some standards and checks in place to make sure that there's some management of the source code, which is important. Clean code. What is clean code? Who wants to go first?
That depends who you
Stefan,
ask.
go ahead. We went to Natalie first last time, so we have to go to you this
I was
time.
about to say that. Depends,
Yeah.
right?
It totally depends. And I think it's, again, what you agree on in a certain group of developers, and what that group is or how the scope is probably variable. But yeah, there are guidelines introduced by Microsoft. There are guidelines introduced by the language itself. For example, just to pick one, the set load fields, which just plain improves performance if you use it, or makes it worse if you do not use it. So that's a guideline I consider. If you do not use it, it's not clean code, because there is something which, with no question, makes it faster. And I think Waldo proved that a couple of times and asked Microsoft why it is that way, that even if you end up not loading the correct fields, it's still faster. So anytime I see a read operation to the database where no set load fields is set, I question that.
That's a good strategy. I like that with the set load fields.
Yeah, so there are those kind of guidelines by the language, and then it's just what you agree on as style guides, like the nice to have features where you just say, well, we do add this keyword in front of everything in our company. We follow Microsoft's guidance there. Then that's like anything that's not following this, not clean code, in my opinion.
Got it. Understood. Natalie, what is your take on clean code?
I agree, but I would start somewhere else. When I imagine clean code, I imagine a code base consisting of good structured code, easy to read also to humans, with having procedures with speaking names, so one could derive what are they actually doing. I want to keep it as redundancy free as possible. We don't want to multiply code, we want to reuse it. It's code that uses the Microsoft base as much as possible, reuse as much as possible, and following the same rules everywhere, to have some to be consistent in general. This is for me one of the most important rules. And on top, on all that, is everything that Stefan already mentioned, to comply to some rules, conventions that we already know. It's about formatting that luckily the AL language itself already does for us, more or less. But any if a code base is really well readable and maintainable, I think then we've come close to the goal of having clean code.
You mentioned at the last sentence what I wanted to ask next about all of this, and that's, where does code readability come into this? Right? Again, we've seen topics recently where people have shared where they talked about the Ternary operator. Does it make the code more readable or less readable? Is it better to have less lines of code that have a lot of, calculations, for example, in it? Or if you have a procedure that returns a Boolean, just have a result and just exit the word result instead of exit and having a if not, then this, that, case, this, type of process. Where does code readability, what is your take on the code readability in here? Should you try to have as few lines as possible, or should you expand it out as much as possible to make it logically flow?
Depends. Think of when AL was introduced, that we finally could get rid of the superfluous begin ends because the code cop or another code analyzer just warned about them, like you don't need them here, put them away. So I did, for example, that, and this already decreased the code to some level. Yeah, help me out.
Yes. Stefan, what do you think with code readability, or what can make it helpful?
Yeah, that also picks up a little bit on the take on that from Natalie before. I think readability sometimes comes at a cost, or the other way around. If you want to improve something else, another aspect of your application, it might decrease readability. And the approach I'm thinking of is what Vieko is showing on every session, I think, recently. His approach to testing and unit testing with interfaces and really extracting dependencies from your functions. That really makes it way easier to test functions. It also makes sure that functions only serve a single purpose, and really a single purpose, decreases dependency and like database dependency. I never thought about that. It's awesome that he brought that up. But what I notice is that readability really is not better with this. If I have like 10 different interfaces that are just there to make it easier to test those functions, and if I have everything split out so every function really does one thing and one thing only, it does not help readability at all. And also, if you increase readability, or if you really make a function more generic so it can be reused wherever it needs to be reused, it can decrease performance, for example. And the question always is, how much do you want to increase readability at the cost of other questions, other topics? And how much value does those other topics maybe have, and how much can you decrease readability so it's still good enough, I would say. So it's really not that easy.
No, it is. And a lot of this is, I hear the word depends, and I get asked a lot of questions. And sometimes I say the same thing. I'm like, well, it depends, because unfortunately, fortunately, it depends how you look at it. With development, there isn't, or with a lot of things in life, it's not just development. There isn't a one size fits all, right? There's a lot of things that are situational, depending upon how it's going to be used, depending upon the environment you're in, or depending upon, a number of factors. But I'm just trying to narrow it down to also get some good ideas myself. See, I do this. I just like to learn and to pick up and to have the great conversations with some of the great members of the community that we have, such as yourselves. And now I'm going to stick with that nitty Natalie. I have to keep telling myself in my head, nitty Natalie, nitty Natalie.
And just to add one more thing, maybe to how complexity and code readability conflict with other things in your code you need to worry about as well. That's maybe where code review can help again. So you can have others read your code and say, well, I don't have a clue what you're doing there. Either you need to document it, or you need to just change the way you write this code, make it more readable. And I'm not sure where I picked up that, but basically a quote, what makes a developer a senior developer or an experienced developer, if they can develop complicated code and make it look easy, like complicated functionality in easy readable code. Make it easy to understand. That's where what is really difficult, I think.
I like that. That is, it's a good approach to have with that. Well,
Maybe
Stefan,
it's time for some confession.
Some what?
Some confession. Because if anybody asked me, Natalie, does your code base, is it clean? Do you produce only clean code? My answer would be no. You would for sure find many places that are not perfect, although I'm that nitty. But it can never be perfect, and sometimes I'm struggling with inner conflicts similar to those that Stefan already described. And sometimes it's a lack of time, and then you're not patient enough, whatever. And so my code base isn't perfect either. And this is where really the code reviews from others who are as nitty as me are so important, because they remind me, hey, why didn't you do that here? And what's happening here? I don't understand this. This is so good input. And if this is practiced vividly, this improves really a lot, and I really love that approach. So please don't ever assume because somebody like me is needy that we are or think we are perfect ourselves. We are surely not. And one thing I would like to pick up, half an hour ago, I think, you, Brad, mentioned a word that was criticism or criticize. No matter whether I add 10 comments in a PR as a reviewer or 100, no matter whether they are nits or bigger issues, none of them is a criticism. They are just issues that I see, that I read. It's like reading a text and decide, okay, there's a spelling mistake or I don't know, but this is really no criticism at all. And if any coder out there feels like it is, this is something that needs to be worked on because it doesn't help. And of course, I as a reviewer can reduce my amount of nits that I'm pushing in there, but it's all a question of communication.
No, I like that. And to go back to your confession, I agree with you, because I look at some code that I have written and I sometimes scratch my head and say, why do you do it that way? Or why did you do it that way? Or, you could have done it a different way. And sometimes it's a point in time. Sometimes it's a matter of understanding. And it's a matter of, I think, for all of us, and I mean by point in time, it's maybe you weren't aware of something at the time, whatever it may be, that, guideline, process, practice, or even just a requirement that you had changed through the process, as it does happen too. So I agree with you that everybody can benefit from a review and the comments of others of what they may see, because you can sometimes become blind to yourself, and sometimes another fresh point of view can help you, or another perspective, I guess you could say is the word I like to use, can help you see things a little bit differently and understand, because of, sometimes we get set in our thoughts and our patterns ourselves, that hearing and seeing the perspective of others is important. And I think that it's the word, people use the word constructive criticism. I think it should be feedback, or something like a less harsh word, I guess you could say, because it is that. Sometimes it's just looking to help each other or to give different perspective, I call it, like I had mentioned, just so that you can see it maybe from a different point of view and get understanding with that.
I feel like in the end, we are all like working together on a code base, and that's really how I think about that. It's just I'm not criticizing yourself, I'm not criticizing the code you're writing, I'm just telling you that I would do that differently, or here you did something that I wouldn't expect there to be, if it comes to logic, or if it's just those kind of small things like here's a typo or something. It's just, review my email, well, I would write it differently. All right, take what you want with this. You don't need to implement it, but it's just my opinion about what you wanted me to review. So
no, I like that. It's good.
Or even asking why you're doing it that way.
Yeah, sometimes I also in pull requests or in code reviews I ask questions like what is about the why did you implement it like this and not like this? I would have done it like this. Why are you doing it not like this? So yeah, definitely, it's a conversation, I think.
That's good. I've when I used to do implementations, I used to always ask why, or when I was going to requirements gathering, I used to always ask people why, and that was the toughest thing. And people sometimes would get annoyed. It says, "Why do you do it this way? Why do you do it that way?" It wasn't a why because I thought it was wrong. It was a why to get a better understanding of what they're doing and why they're doing it this way.
And that's all they know.
Can you validate it a lot? So it is good. I think that we all do have the same, intentions, which is good, which is one thing I really like. I know this Business Central, Navision community has been my life. It's a lot different as of now than it was 300 years ago. But now it seems that everybody works really well together and everybody's striving to help each other out just to lift the product up, because, rising tides raise all ship, and we have a bunch of passionate individuals in the community that want everything to work well and, be, I guess you could say, the best it could be, to use that loosely. So with that, Stefan, Natalie, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today. I appreciate both your time. I appreciate the conversation. Appreciate your insight. I could literally talk for hours about this. We could go down so many different paths with this, but I've been enlightened and learned a lot from the conversation. I have a few things I want to do. I will definitely put back that spelling. Like, I've seen so many people use it and I've never used it. And now, as you had mentioned, how could I have survived without it? I don't know. I'm going to probably put it back because even with, my eyes are getting worse and worse too. So sometimes I miss that. But again, thank you for the conversation. Thank you for your time. We appreciate it. If someone would like to get in contact with you to learn more about what you do, so talk more about code reviews, clean code, or even any other rules or practices, how can they get into contact with you, Stefan?
Probably best would be over Twitter or X, like it's called today. I think I'm accepting messages right away. Otherwise, just post a tweet and ping me, and I will respond for sure.
Excellent. We'll put a link in the show notes to your X Twitter handle. I'll keep calling it Twitter, I think, for the rest of the time that it exists. And Natalie, how about yourself?
Very same for me. So I'm very active on my Twitter or X profile, and you can also drop me a private message, I think, and if not, at least a public post, and I will easily pick it up. If you're a partner and you're on the partner network on Yammer or Viva Engage, you can also reach me there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you both again for your time. We appreciate it. I look forward to talking with you soon. Ciao, ciao. Bye.
Thank you, Kris, for your time for another episode of In the Dynamics Corner Chair. And thank you to our guests for participating.
Thank you, Brad, for your time. It is a wonderful episode of Dynamics Corner Chair. I would also like to thank our guests for joining us. Thank you for all of our listeners tuning in as well. You can find Brad at developerlife.com. That is DVLPRLIFE.com. And you can interact with them via Twitter, DVLPRLIFE. You can also find me at matalino.io, MATALINO.io. And my Twitter handle is Matalino16. And you can see those links down below in the show notes. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, and take care.